you can talk about them.
Right. No, I get it. Michael, you made your point really well. It was brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I just squeezed in. Thanks for taking my call. Do you have your seatbelt on for a second?
I don't, but go for it.
Oh, I think you better think about putting one on here, because first of all, I think you're going to laugh, and I'm not being funny.
Okay, we just have a minute and a half, so let's get right to it.
Yeah. Can we agree that the GOP is sticking their nose under the greater LBGT tent vis-a-vis all the anti-drag laws? Because I think that's what's going on. Yeah, they're attacking the whole LGBT. Okay, here's my idea. Do we have the right to form a religion in the United States still?
Yep.
And we have protection to practice our religion?
Yep.
Okay, let's keep going. I think drag performers, amateur, anyone who performs in drag, amateur or professional, should form a united church of drag. Now, they could, if they choose, pray to Our Lady of Perpetual Deception, if they choose to. It doesn't matter. But one of the things would have to be to practice in order to spread the word of the gospel of drag. Practice drag wherever and whenever possible in order to fall under the protection of practice.
In order to achieve salvation. You can incorporate a church in any state as a nonprofit, and then you will have standing to sue in court on behalf of your religion if you can get enough members to be taken seriously. And I love the idea, Nicholas.
I think it's not as crazy as it at first sounds. It just came to me talking with some friends last night, and I was thinking, wait, this isn't actually crazy at all. It would protect against states passing laws restricting the practice of religion.
Maybe you should reach out to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and ask if they would add drag as a sacrament, because they're already established.
I know. And I think the other thing that might matter is it really just pushes the whole protection of religion in their faces directly.
Yeah. Or the Satanic Temple, is another church that has...
Exactly, they're protected.
Yeah, they are, and they're activists, too. And so maybe they would be willing to add drag as one of their...
I don't want to go down the Satanic route.
Yeah, there may be a downside to that one. Yeah, it's the Church of Drag. I get it. I love it.
Right?
Nicholas, hopefully...
Lady of Perpetual Deception.
Do it, Nicholas. Do it. I got to run. Thank you for the call. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Anything Goes Friday. Do we have any guests tomorrow, Sean?
Hi, Miss Jackson.
Oh, Sonali's going to do this.
Just added the 3 minutes is up the show.
Check that out, and we will be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget tomorrow. She's not a spectator sport. It requires you, so get out there, get active, tag, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Yes.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
If you are trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
To me, part of what I hate about what's happening with the anti-choice legislation is it's all about women. Like, you made a bad choice. You're too incompetent to make some of these decisions, so we're going to make it for you. Anything that acknowledges that there's more than one person involved in a pregnancy, I think is a very good thing.
Joan Esposito, weekday afternoons 2 to 5 on WCPT 820.
Don't let biased algorithms or degree screens or exclusive professional networks or stereotypes. Don't let anything keep you from discovering the half of the workforce who are stars. Workers skilled through alternative routes rather than a bachelor's degree. It's time to tear the paper ceiling and see the stars beyond it. Find out how you can make stars part of your talent strategy at tearthepaperceiling.org. Brought to you by Opportunity at Work and the Ad Council.
This is AP News. I'm Rita Foley. That tornado that ripped through the Texas town of Perryton killed 3 people, including at least 1 who died in what the fire chief calls a direct hit. The AP's Donna Waters says there's a lot of damage.
Is there anyone you wanted me to call to test the levels?
Texas town of 8,000, located just south of the Oklahoma line. Video from TV station KV.
Sure, we'll do.
Flattened structures, destroyed vehicles, and debris scattered everywhere. And Perryton residents are still trying to process the widespread destruction. Emergency officials say at least 1 person was killed in a mobile home park that took a direct hit in the Thursday afternoon storm. I'm Donna Warder.
Several federal agencies have been breached by a Russian ransomware gang, says Homeland Security. But Washington isn't worried. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, is talking about this.
The C10P ransomware syndicate is among the world's most prolific. It announced last week on its dark website that its victims had until Wednesday to get in touch to negotiate a ransom or risk having sensitive stolen data dumped online. A senior CISA official says they've seen no evidence to suggest coordination between C10P and the Russian government. Neither the U.S. military nor intelligence community has been affected. Ben Thomas, Washington.
The effort to expand internet access to every home in this country is getting some big help. $930 million in grants to shore up connections in remote parts of Alaska, Texas, and dozens of other places, so says the Commerce Department. He's out of the hospital, Pope Francis, and the surgeon who operated on him says he's well. Francis had abdominal surgery. A U.S. nuclear-powered submarine has...
CK's patched through. Pulling up Facebook
Okay,
now.
no, that's Attorney Hoffler.
resumed missile tests. This is AP News.
Hey, Attorney Hoffler, babe, I'm sorry for calling you so early, but I'm going to have to...
Russia's accusing Australia
do
of.
a,
The AP's Charles de Ledesma with this story.
Russia's
hurriedly
accused
do
Australia
a-
of
my- the good
Russian-phobic
news is
hysteria for
I
cancelling
didn't-
the lease
my-
on the
my-
land
my good
when
news
Moscow
person
wanted to
canceled
build
on me early
its
this
new
morning.
embassy. The Australian
So
government
I've got to
likes
test
the
the
plan to be a
sound.
security risk because it was
And
too
Dr.
close to
Booth, you're
Parliament
in.
House.
How
Parliament
you doing?
passing emergency legislation
Well, I
blocking
am so sorry.
Russia had won
I'm
a
going to
federal
call you.
court
Let me
last
know
month
if you can
against
have
local
Yvonne
Canberra
call
authorities'
me and
decision
let
to
me
do the
know
same. The
of
Russian
a good
embassies
time
responded
to call
by
you.
posting on social media a
Because I want to
condemnation
speak to
of
this,
Australia's actions.
speak to these
Australia's
people
Prime Minister has explained the
about
urgency
this.
to prevent the site becoming a formal
ASAP.
diplomatic
So you
precedent.
let me
And
know.
Charles de Ledesma.
Wake up early this weekend to catch a celestial sight.
All right, I'm hearing her loud and clear.
Time
Okay, you
before
can hear her
sunrise
on Facebook?
Yep.
Only
Okay,
AP
great.
News.
Oh, you can hear me? Oh, you know,
This is 8:20 a.m. WCPT
Yes,
Willow
just wanted to make sure we
Springs
could-
and streaming
yeah,
worldwide at
so-
WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive
So,
talk, where facts matter.
So just let me know
Now your WCPT 820 weather update.
when I can do that. Because I just want to go on
From
and
the Weatherology Weather
Get that
Center,
done.
I'm meteorologist Paul Frombley.
I believe we have 5 minutes, but I'm going to run and check real quick just to confirm.
Northeast,
what'd you
8 to
say?
15 miles.
I believe we have 5 minutes before the show, but I'm going to run into the room and check real quick.
okay, fantastic.
Tomorrow, high temperatures reach up to
Okay,
80.
well, you know what, so
Turning
you could be
warmer
on
Sunday and Monday
7:30
with
to
highs in the
8
mid
your
80s.
time?
Chance for scattered rain showers Sunday. A
Okay.
look at the short
I'm going to
range,
have
high
Melody
of 73
Sarah,
today. We should dip
and
to
she is the
55
executive
tonight.
director
That's your
of the
latest
American Indian
Chicago
Center of
weather
Chicago.
update.
And so
Right
what I
now,
want to do
54.
is lead with what happened with the case.
Keeping your kids safe on the way to school is a bus driver's
weave in
responsibility.
what happened to-
When that
what
driver
happened
is
with
behind the wheel, they
indigenous
should be
people
focused.
and,
And when you're driving,
debunking the
you
myths
should be
around black
focused too.
fathers, the actions
Texting
of
while
black
driving
fathers.
on Illinois roads is illegal and deadly. Drive
You know,
now.
I mean, 'cause, you know,
Text
this
now.
is a concerted effort.
articles now.
This message
Okay.
brought to you by the Illinois
Yeah, I
Tollway
didn't
State
send it-
Police,
I sent
Department of
it to you, yeah?
Transportation, Secretary of State, and AAA.
I just got the text, but I didn't
Is the one thing that we want more of.
Okay,
Without the donors, I wouldn't have my Audrey. They take care of our housing. They take care of our food. In addition to the best medical treatment my daughter could have had. So it allows me to focus on my daughter and getting her better.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Try being home with Patty Vasquez.
A lot of the right-wing extremists just hate our very existence. And I shouldn't speak for all Democrats, all liberals. I'm sure there are extremists that are violent, and Republicans will be more than happy to show you those images for me. But we don't want to eliminate Republicans. We don't want to eliminate them. We want them to snap out of it and denounce this kind of behavior.
Tom Vasquez, weeknights 5 to 7 on WCPT 820. This is a WCPT 820 Heartland Signal News Minute.
This indictment, I think, reveals in very vivid detail just how dangerous he is to our future.
That's former CIA Director John Brennan speaking about Donald Trump 4 days after the former president was indicted by a Florida grand jury for his handling of government documents. The 37-count indictment, unsealed June 9th, alleges that Trump willfully retained records containing highly sensitive information pertaining to America's military, nuclear, and intelligence secrets.
He is definitely a threat, major dangers in our national security. He has no interest in doing anything except that which is going to advance his own political craven interests. This is a man who didn't care about our national security. His actions and his behavior continue to put this country at risk and American citizens at risk.
Brennan was speaking on MSNBC. For WCPT 820 and Heartland Signal, I'm Andy Miles.
The David Pakman Show.
Dan Crenshaw is spouting something that is almost completely meaningless. It's the opposite of the truth. On the topic of Medicaid, the study also found that when people got Medicaid after not having it, and you compare the two groups, they were detecting that they were diabetic or pre-diabetic. They were managing that at a higher rate. Depression rates went down and financial strain went down, which is a good thing.
The David Pakman Show. Tuesday through Friday evenings at 7 on WCPT 820. Chicago's Progressive Talk.
This is Ron Whittingham, and I'm co-owner of Megan Financial, an independent retirement
2 minutes
services firm here in Chicago.
Perfect.
We built our business on playing the long game, teaching financial literacy to our clients to prepare them for a great future and a dignified retirement. Investments, pensions, 401ks, they're all pretty complicated. We make sure that you understand it all. Give us a call at 708-444-1090. We're Megan Financial, and we're your partners in a happy retirement. Or visit us at megent.com.
Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors LLC, member of FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. The views depicted in this broadcast are general in nature and provided for informational use only. The views are not necessarily those of Cetera Advisors LLC. They should not be considered a specific investment or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Keep in mind that investing involves risk, including loss of principal. Investment decisions should be based upon an individual's own goal, time horizon, and tolerance for risk. Consult your investment and/or tax professional regarding your unique situation.
My brother-in-law died.
1 minute.
Now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we couldn't off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance. For your free quote, call SelectQuote at 1-800-737-9944. That's 1-800-737-9944. Or go to SelectQuote.com. 1-800-737-9944. That's 1-800-737-9944. SelectQuote. We shop. You save. Full details on example policies at SelectQuote.com/commercials.
Because facts matter.
Stand by.
WCPT 820.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am
Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It is Friday, June 16th, 2023. Happy Father's Day, everybody. Happy Father's Day. We're going to be talking about fathers today and families on the Santita Jackson Show. I'm coming to you from WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, sending my love to all the fathers out there, all the father figures. Children don't have to come from your loins, they need to come from your heart. And we're going to be talking about fathers today. We're going to be talking about this ruling that came from the Supreme Court that will allow Indigenous families to stay together. It's a tremendous ruling that keeps the culture alive. And we can't wait to talk about that, as this SCOTUS law upholds Indigenous law that keeps children within their tribal families. And then we're going to weave in the debunking of the myth of the absent Black father. My brother, of course, Jonathan, is in Congress now, and he was talking with one of his Republican colleagues. He said we were having a nice conversation, and I asked him about some particular issue, and then he said he just became, he started foaming with rage, because he was like, and what about these absent Black fathers? Well, that is untrue. There was a study that came out from the CDC in 2014 that showed that Black fathers, whether they were married to the mothers or not, were the most involved fathers with their children of any group. Statistically, it was almost a dead heat, but Black men edged Hispanic and white men out. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fight to keep our families together, because indeed, for hundreds of years, it was illegal for Black people to form families. Illegal in this country. It was illegal for us to marry. The baby daddy is not something that we created. It was created by the slave master. So let's talk about that. It was a slave master mentality that created the construct and the laws that took Indigenous children from their families to put them in institutions that would Europeanize them. So let's talk about that today as we look at Father's Day. And this is not to bring down anyone else. This is to even out the playing field so that we can understand why we are where we are, everybody. Why we are where we are. And why, just generally speaking, fathers are the forgotten parent. We act as if fathers don't matter. And oh my goodness, fathers really, really do. They matter so much. Yes, with your mother, she carried you. There's a blood tie. There's no question. But your daddy he's your father. He's your father, everybody. He is your father. He is your dad. And we're going to be talking about that today on the Santita Jackson Show. Hey, Dave Dowling and Ty Austin from Atlanta, all my morning stars here on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. And Robert Williams, how you doing? Sending you so much love today. And Ari, how you doing, sweetie? Sending you much love today out of the country. And Hannah and all of you, everybody. Jewel up there, everybody. Keep on coming in. Ari's down there in Brazil. And I want you to please continue to share and like the story. Continue to share and like the show today, because we're going to be talking about, I think, just family today and fathers and how important they are as we go into Father's Day. And of course, Monday is Juneteenth. We'll be on the air live talking about what Juneteenth really is and how we need to celebrate the first of the year in the same way, because indeed that was the first date of emancipation for Black people. Juneteenth, Black people had been lied to, and they were kept working for a long time beyond when we were free, but we had not been told we were free. So there's a lot. That's a loaded holiday, everybody. So let's get right to it on the Santita Jackson Show, praying for people in Texas, everybody. At least 3 people were killed and dozens were hospitalized on Thursday after a tornado ripped through a town in the Texas Panhandle, Perryton, Texas, with over 100-mile-per-hour winds. According to officials, at least 200 homes were completely destroyed. Indeed, people in different parts of that town, that little town, they said, some people said, I heard the sirens. Others, just a couple of miles away, said, I heard nothing. And oh, wow, it's a town of more than 8,000 people in the northern part of the state, and they remain completely without power this morning. The 21-year-old Air National Guardsman accused of posting a trove of classified documents on social media has been formally indicted in 6 counts of willful retention and transmission of classified information related to national defense, according to the Justice Department. The Massachusetts native has not yet entered a formal plea and remains in federal custody, everybody. It's very interesting. They don't want to call his name. They want to give him protection. Why? I don't know, but we will see. COVID-19 boosters, a panel of 21 advisors to the FDA unanimously voted Thursday that COVID-19 vaccines should be updated for the fall, as the coronavirus shows no signs of slowing its evolution. And Pope Francis was discharged from Rome's Gemelli Hospital today, where the 86-year-old was recovering from abdominal surgery last week that renewed health fears, but he appears to be doing quite well, everybody. He was smiling and waving in a wheelchair. Thank God for that, everybody. In Chicago, did you notice the change in the weather yesterday? Oh my gosh, it went from like an 80-degree day to like the frigid 60s. Oh my gosh, we're supposed to have a high of 64 today. It is cloudy, and it will be cloudy all day. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 77 degrees and clear. Oh, I wish we could have some of that. Oh, I'm waiting. In Major League Baseball, the Tigers 8, the Twins 4, the Cubs 7, the Pirates 2, the Dodgers 5, and the White Sox 4. In the WNBA, the Fever 92, the Sky 90, a heartbreaker, everybody. And the Lynx will be playing the Sparks tonight. You know, Tisha Williams, Pastor Tisha Dixon Williams, can't be with us today, but I wanted to share something with you about the good news. And the good news is that I had been told down through the years that truth crushed to the earth will rise again, that lies have short legs. They do. They spread like wildfire, but something called truth, something called love always stops it. And so it is the times in which we find ourselves living. We are living in times that give us whiplash every day. I mean, don't you feel like, my goodness, what is going on, everybody? Everything is so crazy. How can we, I mean, my goodness, I mean, every day the corruption, who knew that it was like this? It's always been like this. Always. We're just seeing it. We're just seeing the Supreme Court and how things have actually happened. We're just seeing the presidency and how things have actually occurred there, and in both houses of Congress, and in our homes, and on and on and on and on and on. I was talking with my mother about someone who achieved such greatness. I said, but there was a lot of pain in this person's life. And I think that some bad things happened to her when she was a child. She said, you know, when I was a child, we didn't have language for it. I said, but mother, now we do. Now we do have language for it. Now we do see the things that maybe we were not mature enough to see 50, 60, 100 years ago. And so it is. It is a good thing that we can see the Supreme Court and how things work, because we, the people, have the power to change it. It's a good thing that we can see what happened under the Trump presidency. His presidency was not the first. In fact, all of these presidents, and we can see the senator too, as we look at our president, that they take top secret documents home too. So, okay, we can change that. We, the people, can do that. You can't sit back and wait for the lawmakers to do it. We, the people, have to do it. Wherever you see changes that need to be made, the good news is all of the truth that was crushed to the earth, covered by all of these lies, well, they've been uncovered. And we, the people, have the power, not just to change things, but to make things right, not to make things better. I told you my Uncle Mickey went to the hospital. The doctor came in, and I was sitting there with him. And he said, you know, look, we're going to make you well. We're going to make you better. He didn't say we're going to make you well. He said, we're going to make you better. He said, no. Then give me my clothes and let me get out of this hospital right now, because I want you to make me well. So today, we have an opportunity to get well. When you see the corruption in all of these institutions that increasingly we do not trust, we have an opportunity, that's right, to make things right. So do not be anxious in any of these things today. That's what the Bible tells us. Don't feel sad about a thing. In fact, feel inspired, feel empowered, because we, the people, have the power to change things. We should take the opportunity to be grateful that we live in a time in which so much truth that has been crushed, that has been trampled under the feet of power, is now rising. It lets you know that, for me, a person of faith, that God is real. It lets you know that things will be made right. They will be. But you know what? The universe needs you. God needs you to participate to make things right. So let us make the changes that we need to make. Let's demand them. Let us require them. Let's require them. Let's require a Supreme Court that is free of outside influence from the oligarchs. Let us create a White House, an executive branch, a presidency that's free of the oligarchs too. We just traded the monarchs for the oligarchs. That's all we've done. They're the new kings and queens here. We can make the change. That's the good news. But we have to decide that we're worthy of those changes. We have to decide. We have to really understand that we have the power, not just to make things better, but to make things right. Reach out and touch someone's hand. Make this world the right place because we can. And that is the good news, everybody. Happy Father's Day. Dr. Shanina Knighton, how you doing today?
Good, Santita. How are you?
Hey, it's wonderful hearing your voice today. Wonderful hearing your voice today. Talk to me. You were talking about some of the places, really in our homes that, that are unclean. And, you always talk about the, places that I don't know if we really clean them enough or sanitize them correctly. But you were talking, I wanted to ask you about the bathroom, just, and the shower, the bathtub. Are we getting those areas, the toilet, are we getting them as clean as we can?
So one of the things, and Santita, I'm going to stay on this topic for a little bit because I still do want to still talk about the body I had mentioned before. But as it comes to the bathroom, specifically the toilet, one of the things that many people are not aware of is the after effect of flushing the toilet and the after effect of when you wash your hands and what is splashing back up to you. It's boomerang effect, okay? So what we have found literally is that depending on the proximity of the toilet to the sink, as well as depending on, like, let's say the openness of a bathroom, if you can smell, then that means that you can inhale. So people don't recognize that if they are literally inside of a restroom and they're smelling toxins, those toxins still exist and are present in the air. And when they're present in the air, that still means, of course, that there is a risk of contamination. And so when we use restrooms, actually I wrote something because people have a tendency to, like, let's say, touch the stall wall. The stall walls of public restroom is one of the most nastiest things. And I know I'm switching from being inside of a home to the stalls, but they're synonymous in a way. Because those walls inside of a home, similarly to a stall, is where people actually wash down the least amount. They assume that, hey, I need to wash down the toilet because the toilet is clean, but we don't think about that boomerang effect of that splash that is getting on the surrounding walls. So when people go to touch those walls, when people go to, like, let's say, sit something down and let's say hook their purse on some sort of, door or something that is within close proximity, they very rarely pay attention to the fact of what splashes when someone has something in the toilet. So I encourage people, when you are in your restroom at home or when you are in a public restroom, if there is a sink that is located near the toilet, wash down that sink. If there is a wall that's near the toilet, wash down that wall, because whenever you use the restroom, there is a splash effect that occurs even if you're sitting down on the toilet when you flush it. And so when people say that cell phones are as dirty as a toilet seat, some of the reason is because of how close proximity people tend to put their phone inside of the restrooms and the fact that they don't clean them. So I recommend to people to make sure that if you are at home, you are cleaning those walls. Even for, like, let's say, a shared bathroom between women and men. When a seat goes up, and yes, even if like, let's say the aim is correct per se, it's still going to be an effect, like it's going to be a splash effect. Even if someone's sitting down, if they're standing up, when you flush a toilet, water is going to come out. What's in that water can then transfer to the surfaces passed around. That accumulation of what transfers to the surfaces that are around is potentially what can make you sick the next time you go to touch one of those surfaces. So that is one of the dirtiest, least paid attention to areas in the bathroom when people say that they're cleaning the bathroom. They oftentimes clean the floor, they clean the sink, they clean the toilet. But the question is are you cleaning the surrounding walls? And if you're in a public restroom, are you paying attention to those surrounding walls and making sure that you're coming in contact with them at as least as possible because of the many contamination elements that exist, the many people that use that public restroom before and after you, and the fact that literally those germs are not only running a risk of getting on, let's say, your hands, but they're running a risk of getting on your clothes or anything that you have that may accidentally swipe up against those stall walls.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Well, let's get back to the body. You got 4 minutes.
Okay, the body. I'm going to preface this by saying I continue to talk about hands, hands, hands. So anything that I'm going to say for the next 4 minutes is going to be keep your hands off of, okay? So I encourage you, one, keep your hands off of your face. I've constantly said this. I brought this face up. I said that the mask could be, let's say, an object that could contaminate your face if it's not clean. I encourage people to still keep their hands off of their face because what will happen is if you have dirty hands that can, or just regular hands that can contain oils, that can actually cause acne in your face from germs, because you're getting germs on your fingers that can actually make it worse. And then what happens is if someone develops pimples, they should never pop the pimples on their face because they're exposing their face, not only to their hands that they continue to touch it with, but to other things that can get trapped on the skin. And so that is how people sometimes end up with infections. Secondly, I would encourage people to keep their hands off of their eyes. We already know how extremely sensitive eyes can be, but keeping your hands in your eyes, you run the risk, again, of bacteria getting inside of your eyes. People rubbing their eyes, too, and this is just even for cosmetic reasons, but it causes more wrinkles and more dark circles over time. And so it's very important that people actually keep their hands out of their face. And then sometimes when you end up with people that say, oh, my gosh, my eyes are irritated, they're red, I ended up with pink eye, or I ended up with this, and they're thinking that they didn't got it from, let's say, another person, it's 9 times out of 10 it comes from bacterial irritants. A lot of the irritants that end up, let's say, inside of the body that can make us sick can also end up on the body and still make us sick and bring about these problems. Remember, if our eyes, mouth, ears, and nose are meant to protect us, putting them in danger by touching them with unclean hands then lowers the ability for them to be able to perform and keep germs out or service that barrier before they would enter the body. The other thing is the ears. Same exact thing. I know people like to stick things down in their ears to be able to remove wax. However, one of the challenges is that sometimes people will stick anything down their ears, not recognizing what's clean and what's not. But you have to recognize that you are exposing your ear canal to something that is potentially contaminated. And yes, that does mean that you can run the risk of getting an ear infection by sticking something in your ear that's not clean. And remember, if you're not washing your hands before any of that, you should never stick anything down your ear. But if you're not washing your hands, again, you are putting yourself at risk. Your nose. Okay, so Our body has its own healthy bacteria, but our nose is actually meant to trap bad bacteria that may come from dust and other particles before it travels down to our body. People putting their hands on their nose, coming in contact with their nose, is literally taking those environmental germs that get trapped in their nose, and they're transferring it to their hands to then transfer it to another area of your body. So this is particularly important because as we face COVID-19, as we face RSV, other conditions that are out there, pay attention to how people interact with their nose. One little small hand swipe of the nose and then touching you or a surface could be just that one moment that could end up making you sick, or it can also end up making them sick because they could have trapped a droplet from going down into their system and now they transferred it to another part of their body, such as their mouth, which does happen. Speaking of the mouth, last but not least, Santita, and I'm going to make this really fast.
30 seconds.
People should always keep their hands. Gotcha. People should always keep their hands off of their mouths. As we know, the mouth has about 72 different strains of bacteria. Can even carry fungus as well, depending on people's eating habits. However, what happens is if you add germs to your hands that then go to your mouth by touching doorknobs, faucets, microwaves, all kinds of nasty stuff, and then putting it inside of your body, the mouth is a one-way ticket to getting sick. That means that as soon as you put those germs in your body, it's traveling down to your system that can then make you sick. So I just want to remind people, everything that I've mentioned has to do with the concept of touching hands. It is important to make sure you are keeping your hands clean, cleaning your hands thoroughly, and understanding that that is the first and most important way to prevent the spread of infection. Have a great day.
Hey, Dr. Nina, HEYDRNINA. That's her handle in social media. You need to follow her. Think about that. Let's talk about what happened with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made a tremendous decision that really is beginning to make things right with the indigenous community. Let's talk about it. It has profound impact upon their families and preserving their culture. Kind of talk about that on the Father's Day edition of the Santita Jackson Show. Back in just a minute. Dr. Knighton, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, hon, I'm doing well. The weather here changed literally. I went into a restaurant yesterday, came out of the restaurant, and it had dropped like 15, 20 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my.
I sound like Cleveland.
Did that happen there, too?
Listen, Cleveland, this happens all the time. See, I tell people Cleveland is the only place I know where I can see all 4 seasons in a day.
Well, now that's the Midwest. Those of us who live on the Great Lakes.
Exactly.
Girl, it was so bad yesterday.
I just seen the day go from snowing to 70 degrees, and I seen the day go from 70 degrees down to snowing and frozen rain.
Girl, they had to turn the heat on in the restaurant. I mean, everyone was like, wait, shut those windows. What you doing? You're about to die. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I mean, I was like, it is freezing up in here. And thank goodness I was layered because I just believe in that. But, oh, man, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I mean, and, I ran. I mean, thank goodness I had my scarf that's like 6 or 7 feet long, literally. I mean, literally, you can just wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap. And girl, I wrapped and wrapped. I look like a mummy walking across the street. I mean, tissue under my nose running. Oh my gosh. But here we are, girl. Here we are. But I'm glad to hear your voice today. And thank you for making me wipe down the walls. You know, I like water closets too. I like for the toilet to be separate from everything else. I don't have that, unfortunately, but the toilet in my bathroom is way away from the sink and everything. It's in a corner. And oh man. But I mean, I am like I have just bottles of bleach that I just spray all the time. You know,
but you should. Yeah. I was gonna ask you too. So what you got planned for your dad?
Hi, Miss Jackson.
He's going to be out of town. Oh, yes, hon. Who do we have?
We have Attorney C.K. Hoffler, Dr. Yuri, Reverend Dr. Yuri Todd, Melody Serna, and Dwight McKee.
Okay,
and
fantastic.
We have about, sorry, 1 minute, minute and a half.
Okay, let me say hello to them so we can make sure that we have the sound, okay? So we'll be listening to Facebook. Hold on one moment, Dr. Knighton.
Okay.
Dwight McKee? I'm doing a mic check, everybody.
Morning.
Okay, hey, Miss Serna, how are you?
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Reverend Dr. Yuri.
Good morning.
Okay, great. Could you repeat that, Dr. Yuri?
Sure. 1, 2, 3,
Okay,
4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Very, very good. Attorney Hoffler?
Good morning, Santita.
Okay, fantastic.
And everybody.
Sound very, very clear. What we're going to do, this is, of course, Father's Day, and we're looking at really ways in which our families have been under threat, and we have survived. We have thrived. But a momentous decision came from the Supreme Court regarding this historical abuse that Indigenous people have had to withstand. And then, of course, we're going to look at that CDC study from 2014 that gives rest to the myth of the absent Black father. So, got a lot to talk about today. So let's get right to it. Melody, I'm going to be coming right to you to let us know what happened with this case, okay?
Stand by.
Okay.
All right. Make sure everybody's off mute. All right. We're coming.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on Friday, June 16th, 2023. Of course, Monday is Juneteenth, but on Sunday, we have Father's Day. Fathers tend to get short shrift. You know, we love Mother's Day, and heaven knows I do. But I honor my father with as much fervor and with as much energy as I honor my mother. It took two. It takes two to make a thing go right. It takes two to get you here. And we have a lot of myths that we've got to debunk today. Black fathers absent. No, that's not true. The CDC in 2014 revealed a study that showed that Black fathers, like white fathers, like Latino fathers, like all fathers, love their children and they take care of their children. And in fact, spend more time with their children than anybody. Statistically, it was almost a dead heat, but Black men edged Black and white and brown fathers out. So whether they're married to the mothers or not, Black fathers are there. They're there, present in their children's lives, reading to them, taking them to school, giving them the monies that they have. They're doing that. And then we're looking at really just the crime against the Indigenous people since we came here and sat on their lands, took their land from them. We haven't talked about it enough. And in fact, we've heard stories about the tens of thousands of Indigenous children who've been buried at these Catholic schools where they were sent to be Europeanized, to be turned into little brown white people. And then, and we still haven't heard all that we need to hear about those stories. And then we look at the fight that has been that they have waged to hold on to their children so that their children can know who they are and be connected to their traditions. So when the Supreme Court, a few years ago now, ruled that half of Oklahoma, about 48% of it, according to treaty, belongs to Native Americans, we rejoiced because we said, wait a minute, maybe we're going to actually do right by Indigenous people. And now the Supreme Court, virtually the same Supreme Court, except we now have Ketanji Brown Jackson, now they upheld the law keeping Indigenous children with their tribal families. And so it is here that we welcome back to the show Melody Serna, the Executive Director of the American Indian Center of Chicago. She's part of the panel today that includes Dwight McKee, social scientist, attorney C.K. Hoffler, and Reverend Dr. Todd Yuri, Senior Pastor of the Douglas Community Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, and from Rainbow Push. We got a lot to talk about today. Melody, what happened with the Supreme Court? What did they decide? And why is this of such great import to not just the indigenous community, but to the American family?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the Supreme Court the Supreme Court voted to uphold, it's called ICWA, it's the Indian Child Welfare Act. And so this act was put out in 1978, and it was in an effort to redress what was deemed as a problem that was threatening the survival of Native tribes. For decades before that, as many as 1/3 of Indigenous children were being placed in non-Native homes, and they were, being adopted or fostered out. There was just a huge disparity on the removal of Indian children. And so Congress decided that they were going to put this act in as the gold standard of keeping Native children with Native families. And so it recognized that tribal nations have these inherent powers of self-government, which include the right to provide for the social, economic, safety, and cultural needs of their citizens, which include their children. So similar to the stages, similar to like states and like foreign countries, tribal nations are sovereign as well and should be involved in the cases that involve our own citizen children. And so with the ruling, the justices have set a clear message and precedent that this, these attacks, these pulling these children out of their homes, the attacks on our tribal sovereignty will not be tolerated. And we hope that this is the decision that continues to lay to rest the political tax. We know that it's not, but this is a case that shows that Indian country is united in the defense of our sovereignty and the protection of our children.
So why is this so important today? It's amazing that we have this kind of case that would come before the court today, and we see, and I'm going to broaden this out to the rest of the panel. There's controversy about Black children being adopted by white families. It's like, can they really give our children what they need so that they can be protected against anti-Black racism? What is your take on this? I mean, why is it so important to keep these children if their parents cannot care for them? Why is it so important to keep them within their tribal families?
So one of the things that ICWA does that I don't know if people are really aware is that a part of this act means that it doesn't mean that only Native people will get these children. Mm-hmm. So let's be very clear about what the act really is. What it does say is that if the state finds out that they have a Native child in their foster system or that comes across, in their way, they reach out to that child's tribe. That tribe then has the authority to then determine what's best for its citizen. And whether that means it could put that child with an extended family member or another tribal member, or even authorize the state for that child to be with another Native family who may not even be of the same tribe. If those things are then not available, then the tribe will say, okay, it's in that child's best interest. Very specifically in Brackeen, when they came for the government, they adopted a little Navajo boy, but before they got there, they were fighting with the Navajo Nation because there was a Navajo family who was willing to adopt this boy. And they were like, well, he was with us first. We can love him better. But can you give him the traditional culture? And I'm not saying this just about Navajo people. I think this is applicable to all of our nations. But they're a very sovereign nation. Navajo Nation has held on to their sovereignty for so long, since time immemorial. They refuse to let go of their language. You can't teach Navajo language if you, no offense, are a white person. You can't do that. You can't teach ceremony if you're a white person. You can't just walk on the Navajo Nation and teach and say, hey, this is where you come from, and teach that boy that ceremony. This law was to protect our children as the gold standard of saying, look, we're protecting our future generations. These genocidal acts, these governmental acts of genocide in regards to Native people stop now, and they stop today. At least that was the
the goal, but it was also to show that Congress had the inherent, right to but they had the right to determine what that looked like in those relationships with tribes, because we are sovereign nations. And I think sometimes people really don't understand that each federally recognized tribe has its own government, has its own legislature, has its own judicial system. We have branches of government too. We have those things. And so when you come onto our reservations, all 500 plus the 200 state recognized, you're breaking the law. And you mentioned the law about the Supreme Court 2 years ago. Of course, they went and said, yep, we own half of Oklahoma. But they walked it back 2 years later in their other Supreme Court decision that says, yeah, but the tribe owns the land, but the state still can authorize to arrest non-Native people for crimes against Native people on the same land. So they walked it back a little bit. They walked back that sovereignty a little bit. And this case was almost like a benchmark. Also, Santita, I guess, when we look at how these companies, these big companies, these big lobbyist companies, this was how they were coming for Native gaming. This is how they were going to come for our sovereignty rights. This is how they were going to come for a lot of different spaces. There's another Native case in the Supreme Court now. It's Lacta Flambeau versus the U.S. government. That's also about, Native sovereignty and our rights to govern, our own lands and spaces. So, yeah, this is a huge win for us, and I think it's a huge win for our sovereignty, but more than that, it's a huge win for our people and our culture, and why it's so important, because these are the things that you can't teach if you're not Native.
Dwight McKee, your reaction to this?
Well, I think it's a tremendous decision, long time coming. There are two real major sins in America. One is racism, but the other one is ethnocentrism. That is a belief that white culture is the only legitimate culture. To be a real American, there are a couple of things you need to believe. One is that Jesus spoke English. I mean, we really believe that. Secondly, that Christianity is the only true religion.
And that he looked like a white hippie.
That's right. Secondly, is that Christianity is the only true religion. We have to believe that. Thirdly, is that God gave capitalism to Moses when he gave him the Ten Commandments on the Mount Sinai. That capitalism is based on some biblical mandate. We have to believe that. And so the cultural centric ethos is really what makes us condemn or look down on other cultures. I mean, the last thing we have to believe that America is the greatest country in the world in spite of racism, genocide, corruption, pornography, that God somehow made America unique, United States unique among all the nations of the world, and therefore it should be the gold standard for civilization and for culture. And so not only have black people and people of color suffer from that, the natives have suffered from that more than anybody else, because not only did they steal their land, there was a real intention to steal their legacy and to make natives, to Americanize natives, or to civilize the natives, and to remake them in their own image. Their image being, white, civilization, European, westernized. And so to do that, you have to take away from them all of their inherent cultural values, because when you then make those values, you put a value to the values. Your values become superior and somehow their cultural values and mores become inferior. And so not only do you have to try to remake them into your image, you also have to disband and destroy everything that's in their inherent native image. And that's why this civilization has been so destructive to everybody who's not white and realize who believes in those things.
CK, why does this have to go to court?
Good morning, Santita, and everyone. This has to go to court. It should not have to go to court. It should not have to go to court. But it has to go to court because there are rights that have been violated. The rights have been violated, potentially the rights really of indigenous people. So that's why it has to go to court. But it went to court because of the families who were protesting, who didn't want to relinquish their custody, if you will, and who wanted to be able to, from the foster care system, adopt or take care of indigenous children and not be subjected to any tribal laws or preferences and things of that nature, and they felt they were being discriminated against. This is akin to in my thinking, a reverse discrimination case. So I think, obviously, to adopt this right, I'm encouraged that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in this way. I think the analysis of the court was spot on. I don't think this battle is over, but I do think that this is a major, major victory. And the reason why I don't think it's over, there might be some challenges on a state court level relative to this and similar things. But it really was families who felt that they should be able to adopt or take from foster care these indigenous children, and that they didn't want to have any type of tribal authority or any type of laws. They didn't want to respect the laws that were in play and wanted to just do what they wanted to do. That's why it went to court. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court got it right. I'm encouraged by this opinion because, quite frankly, this tells me that the U.S. Supreme Court has the ability to do the right thing, even with this conservative-leaning court, and that you can have, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito are off the chain from my standpoint in terms of their views, so they will stand in defense of anything that I believe is progressive and stands for social justice, but everyone else united. I mean, this is a 7-2 opinion, so I think this is a good thing. This gives me some hope that this U.S. Supreme Court can actually do the right thing and may do the right thing in some other cases. I'm holding my breath because when it comes to civil rights, voting rights, immigration rights, and things like that, this court is not likely to be as progressive and forward-thinking and social justice-minded. But I'm hopeful that maybe I could be wrong and it could happen. But putting that aside, Santita, they had to go to court because there were those who were challenging the laws, the indigenous laws, the laws of the land. I mean, we have to really realize this is a legal challenge like other legal challenges, and because they felt they had the right and should have the right and should be entitled to make a determination as to the welfare of indigenous people or Native Americans.
Reverend Dr. Uri, why would this decision be important to indigenous people and to all of America? Why is this such an important decision?
Well, it's an important decision because it forces an understanding of the history of the country when it comes to engagement with indigenous people. While the law in question is a fairly recent act, the principle that this case is about is whether or not this notion of dueling sovereigns, whether a state process, a state government as a sovereign, over and against Indian nation sovereignty and the various treaties, which one must relent when it comes to making determinations about who gets custody of Native children.
And so, in one sense, it's a huge victory for the autonomy of Indian people. But it's also a huge blow in many senses to this notion of states' rights. Should a state proceeding operate autonomously to make ultimate determinations about who gets custody? In most instances, in the doctrine of family law, it does. In this instance, or in instances like this, it does not. And I think it's particularly interesting when you read Justice Thomas's dissent. A lot of us get interested in the ruling. I'm often interested in the reasoning about the folks who voted no, because very often they try to give a tell to the detractors to see how they might come at disrupting the process in a different way. Justice Thomas goes through great pain to distort the historical understanding of the interactions between independent peoples, right? The reason there is a treaty, or there are a number of treaties, actually several, hundreds, between Native peoples and the United States government. Many of them, the American government has reneged on. It speaks to this notion of how peoples who have fought to protect their culture, their autonomy, their governance, their structure, all of those things that we have been told that somehow or other these backward Indians could not do. It actually counters that notion about how we see people historically through time, and it forces a different understanding. And so to see Justice Thomas and Justice Alito decide that they would dissent, saying that state courts ought to have autonomy, obviously they did not read the ruling about the sovereignty and the protection of native lands that Justice Gorsuch wrote in, I think it may have been the last session or the session before of the court. It kind of speaks to this interesting tension, to your point, Santita, about where the court's going to fall, particularly in the same session where we're going to get the independent state legislature ruling in the coming days. It kind of gives us this sense that maybe some of these rulings may not be as extreme or harsh as we would otherwise anticipate, if we can make sure that they are grounded in history, accurate history. That's number one. So this critical race theory foolishness that we have off to the side, that somehow or other we should not talk about these things. All you need to do is study court rulings, and you can get all of the critical race theory you need. But at the same time, understand that we've got the fight. The fight these days is litigation and legislation, and we have to have access to the courts, which ultimately comes down to who's sitting on these courts and helping to make these critical decisions.
But you're right. Can I say something real quick?
I've got 2 minutes.
Okay. Your whole notion, though, of that the U.S. is a Supreme Court is presumptuous and ethnocentric. You know, it's like when you win the World Series and you've never played anybody outside the United States. I mean, it is, that is unto itself ethnocentric or centric. That because it's a U.S. court, therefore they make a supreme decision on other sovereign people. In some ways, to me, the sovereign nations should make their own decisions, and then America should abide by their decisions, since it's their lands and their sovereign nations. But the presumption that the United States courts have the last word on other people's land is part of the problem.
Well,
to
you
me.
know, but Melody, it seems that our government does not respect the sovereignty of indigenous people. The last minute belongs to you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm in complete agreement. I think my surprise was in Gorsuch and even Amy Coney Barrett really saying and kind of using their originalist view of saying, you know, Congress has given the right to these tribal nations to be sovereign, to govern their own people in the way that they choose to govern their people, their citizens, or anyone they say are their citizens, because it was a way of Congress to undo some of the harm. It was apologizing without apologizing. And so I think it's one step in the right direction. I definitely I'm going to be on the lookout. There are a couple other things that are before the Supreme Court as well. But I think for me, it's a huge win. It's a tremendous win. But it's right. It's saying that this white, Supreme Court, and I say white because that's who built it, right? That's not who's on it now, but this was this construct of telling us you have the right to tell the rest of us what to do and what laws are just for our person. And I think coming in and saying that Native people have the inherent right since time immemorial to govern ourselves on our own lands is really important. So this ruling was super huge, especially in the wake now that the Senate committee just passed the Residential Boarding School Act. And so we're going to see what that looks like too.
Well, we'll be back in just a few minutes because we're talking about Father's Day. We're talking about really holding on to our families. Indigenous families have been violated since we all got here. And Black families were not allowed, really essentially ruled illegal because it was illegal for us to marry. It was illegal for us to form our families. So we've got a lot to talk about today on Father's Day as we debunk the myth that Black fathers are absent. It's just not true, everybody. The CDC came out with this information in 2014. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. CK, I hate that you're going to have to leave us, but we're going to let you go. Do you want to say anything before you get off the air? And when will you be back on Court TV?
I'll be on Court TV from 1 to 3 today.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me to say that. And but essentially, what I like to say is this: so in the state of Florida, where the whole you basically, from my standpoint and from all the interpretations Florida along with the governor has done, is you can't teach complete Black history or American history. You would not be able to teach what has happened to indigenous communities in this country because of the negativity surrounding the conduct. So theoretically, with this magnificent opinion, in Florida public schools, they really couldn't talk about it. Just think about that. I just want us to reflect on, and it's not just Florida, but for those states that take a very severe draconian view of critical race theory and related, because it's not just critical race theory, but everything related to that, you would not be able to talk about this wonderful opinion, the ramifications, how it's a victory, because it would violate the laws that these governors have put down about not wanting the kids to learn all the negativity that has happened in the United States as it relates to some people. They don't mind it as it relates to other people, but I just want us to reflect on how this opinion in those states that have outlawed, basically, teaching American history, how and whether this opinion would be able to be discussed in classrooms by teachers without the teachers fearing sanctions, including termination and other, and in some instances, criminal liability.
CK, I would say that is the makings for a test case. If we can find the right one, we should pursue that because it is not the teaching of a perspective. As you have argued, this is actually
Reverend Wilson and Mark Fancher on the line
from the court. It would be interesting to see what Mr. DeSantis would have to do if we just looked at the case law and taught case law about race and racial entitlement and engagement as it has come down from the Supreme Court. I believe he would lose on that, and we could take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Well, absolutely. Imagine the Supreme Court making a ruling on whether their ruling should be taught in school. How about that?
Exactly.
So
I like that.
So I look at it from that lens. Dr. Gary, I absolutely look at it from that lens. That's the significance. This opinion is so significant on many levels, but I'm forward thinking in terms of what it means, what it could mean, and what it means in certain states. And I point again to the fact that professors at FAMU could be challenged if they teach Black history. At historically Black colleges, that are state colleges, where you are in a state like Florida, like FAMU is, where the governor has said you can't do this, you can't do that, or you can risk being terminated or worse. You mean to tell me at those schools they can't? Because teaching about our history and teaching all the things that are now being prohibited, you can't mention diversity in this and all that kind of stuff, is part of what we teach, just period. Part of actually what everyone should teach. So it's not just in a history course. It's not just in a Black history class. It's in all courses. So that we have to reflect on how that's going to change what our professors can and cannot do at HBCUs that are state schools and states where governors have said that you cannot teach about American history or the so critical race theory. And by the way, that does cover, in their minds, indigenous people. So I want to be really clear.
They have to be at the foundation of it. I mean, this is ridiculous. You can't teach American history. Yeah, I know, but it's just ridiculous. You can't teach American history without teaching indigenous history. It is American history. They're the original American.
Well, I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, yes, I don't mean to talk about you. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
I don't know if you saw, but we just passed in Illinois the Illinois Education Bill for Native American history. And I'll tell you right now, I'm a fan of the bill, but it's a Swiss cheese bill. And I tell people that. I'm very clear that it's a Swiss cheese bill. Is it a step for Native folks to get their history on? But it's pre-colonial history. And the people who are in charge of the history that they want to teach about Native Americans is done by non-natives. Let's be very clear. PBS is who are they to tell us what we can teach about our own people to these classrooms? And that has always been the problem with Indigenous history, but also with Black history. It is a colonial mindset of they teach what they want to teach in order for them to feel better about themselves versus what is quote-unquote critical race theory. It's not about race theory. It's about history. And if we don't, as a nation, start to acknowledge the real history that has happened in this country, we are continuously feeding lies and narratives to this new generation. And I think we're in the precipice now where this generation is asking for the truth and reconciliation. And we are there. We are there right now. And we have the responsibility to start holding people accountable to what they're teaching to our children. And, what that looks like, but holding our governments accountable and saying, don't give us a crap bill.
Back in a minute.
Bill that is just, it checks off a box. Because I'll tell you, I'm going to be over there poking ISB really, really, quite often saying, hey, we don't teach that. Hey, who did you talk to? Hey, what does that curriculum look like? You can't, no offense, you can't ask a Navajo to teach Illinois, history about Potawatomi people. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like asking, Germany to teach about, Africa. We can't do that. Those are two different spaces and two different sovereign nations and two different essential countries. That's how our tribes look at each other. We are all one, but we do have our own cultures and traditions, and the lands are different. And everywhere you go in this country, the indigenous lands are different, their traditions are different, and their languages are different.
I want you to make
putting
that
us
point.
in one box is not okay.
I need you to make that point on the air. We're about to come back up. You need to make that point. Yes.
I have to run, but this has been a great discussion. I hope to continue it. Thank you, everybody. This has been very enlightening. I'm going to use this in other shows that I do. Very enlightening.
I'll send you her number.
Change the world. Change the world. We can change the world.
You got to get your story out there, buddy.
Change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey everybody, happy Father's Day from the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station at AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want you to meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson and Friends page and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Everybody, Facebook keeps telling me, please keeps asking me, Kenneth and Jewel, to get you all over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So please go on over there, Andre and John. And Ari from Brazil and Janet. How you doing, sweetie? Sending you all so much love today. Stanley, please go on over to YouTube, Brant, how you doing? Sending you so much love today. We're talking about really Father's Day and dispelling myths that surround Indigenous people and that surround Black fathers. Black fathers are not deadbeat fathers. They're not absent fathers. They're the most present fathers in the United States, according to a CDC study from 2014. We got to talk about that, but weave that into the Supreme Court decision that really begins to respect the sovereignty, the culture of Indigenous people. When a nation of Indigenous people want to have one of their own, not be floated out into the adoption system, but they say, we can take care of our child. That should happen. The Supreme Court said, you're absolutely right. We've got to talk about that with Melody Serna and this tremendous panel that we have with us today. So let's get to these headlines so we can get right back to the show. We've had such a tremendous panel with us today. Boy, we're praying for the people in the Texas panhandle town of Perrytown, Texas. At least 3 people were killed and dozens were hospitalized yesterday after a tornado ripped through the town last night. Over 100-mile-per-hour winds, at least 200 homes were completely destroyed. The 21-year-old Air National Guardsman accused of posting a trove of classified documents on social media has been formally indicted on 6 counts of willful retention and transmission of classified information related to national defense, according to the Justice Department. COVID-19 boosters, a panel of 21 advisors to the FDA unanimously voted yesterday that the COVID-19 vaccine should be updated for the fall as the coronavirus shows no signs of abating in its evolution, everybody. Pope Francis, well, our prayers have been answered. 86-year-old Pope Francis, who was admitted to the hospital 9 days ago to have stomach surgery, abdominal surgery, has now been discharged, and he is in good health, waving and smiling to the faithful. In Chicago, we're going to have a high of 64 degrees. It will be cloudy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 77 degrees and clear. In Major League Baseball, the Tigers 8, the Twins 4, the Cubs 7, the Pirates 2, the Dodgers 5, and the White Sox 4. The WNBA, well, the Fever, they bested the Chicago Sky in a nail-biter yesterday, 92-90. Oh, my gosh. But the Lynx will be coming back against the Sparks tonight. We do hope. Call me at 773-763-9278. Let's talk about fatherhood. Let's talk about it right here on the Santita Jackson Show. Joining Dwight McKee and Reverend Dr. Todd Geary. Of course, Attorney C.K. Hoffler just made her exit. She's going to be on Court TV today, everybody, from 12 to 2 Central Standard Time, 1 to 3 Eastern Standard Time. Do not forget her, everybody. And, of course, we've got Melody Serna, who is the executive director of the American Indian Center of Chicago. She's been helping us to understand this momentous case that impacts not just Indigenous people, but it impacts us all. We're going to be talking about that with her. And, of course, Attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant civil rights lawyer and civil libertarian. And, of course, the author of The Negroes of Friends Village. And, of course, Reverend Jeanette Wilson from Rainbow Push, educator, lawyer, pastor. So let's get right to it. And, of course, I want to hear from you. Let me go to Mama D, if you don't mind, Melody. Mama D, if you're still there, I want to hear your voice today. Mama D?
Yes, well, hallelujah, greetings, and happy Father's Day.
Oh, happy Father's Day to you.
Okay, only the indigenous Native American Indians and the indigenous Native American Africans could be born in America and not be citizens in the land of their birth until the 14th Amendment. And they were the first protected class of persons. They are twin victims of the American genocidal Holocaust. But my question is, since the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act and the John Lewis Right to Family Act disproportionately impacts slavery crimes against humanity descendants and Jim Crow genocide survivors who have never been made whole, and they are the only arrivals who came in chains and not from a country by choice, why aren't we sovereign?
Does anyone want to take a stab at that? Mark Fancher, why don't you jump in on that?
Well, whether we should be sovereign and whether the U.S. government is prepared to acknowledge such are two different questions. And from the outset, the U.S. government has extended to indigenous nations some degree of recognition of sovereignty. In some cases, they've described them as dependent sovereigns. And I don't know precisely what their thinking was, but it likely had everything to do with the fact that it was obvious that European colonizers came over and they stole land, and in order to create jurisprudential explanations for how and why they did that, it was useful for them to regard these nations, as opposed to people who would become citizens of this new thing that they were creating that ultimately became the United States of America. With respect to enslaved Africans, they brought them over here as property, and they treated them as such. They never acknowledged that they didn't acknowledge their humanity, first of all. So certainly they were not prepared to acknowledge their nationhood, or even the fact that they were legitimate communities. And so from a legal standpoint, they were chattel, they were property. And when you are dealing with chattel, when you're dealing with property, then certainly property can't be a nation. They can't be sovereign. So at the time of abolition, then they were left with the puzzle of what to do with these people. They weren't a nation as far as the U.S. law was concerned. And the only thing that they could do was to, in some way, amend the Constitution in ways that would impose upon them some status that resembled citizenship, that would give them control and would give them the authority, the right to dominate their lives, until such time as they could figure out what better to do with them.
So, Melody, would you explain to us, of course, she's the executive director of the American Indian Center of Chicago, what did the Supreme Court decide? Just briefly, if you could recap that for us.
Sure. So ICWA is the Indian Child Welfare Act, and the Indian Child Welfare Act recognizes our powers to self-govern for our children. And so it's similar to, our sovereignty is similar to other states and foreign countries, and it gives us the inherent right to send a clear message that these attacks on our sovereignty, but also it's a right to protect our children from being raised outside of their culture, but outside of their tribal lands, outside of their homes. And so, I know that we're talking about this on Father's Day weekend, and I think, a really good segue into that is to understand that ICWA was protecting our families. Mm-hmm. It's really about protecting our families. We're trying to keep our family units as close as we can. We've been losing our culture for hundreds of years due to, colonized, processes put into place. And I think this was a really good stand for the Supreme Court to say, you know what, these sovereign nations can keep their families together, and that these nations can say where the future of our people go. Because if you keep taking children away from their families, we lose our culture, we lose our people. And the 2020 census, we were the largest growing in percentage of all races across the United States were Native Americans. We were popping up in places people didn't expect us to pop up in. And we're still severely undercounted because they don't want to go on reservations and they don't want to really look like that. But that's another subject for another day. But,
no, it isn't. Undercounting and underrepresentation. No, it's all in the same basket. To me.
Yeah. And it is, right? So if you can't count, the trailers that are on a reservation because you can't call it a street, then they can't vote. They can't be counted. It's like you're an invisible person to the United States government. And I think that just goes right into that boarding school history that you asked me to touch on too, right? So that's actually how ICWA was born, is out of this boarding school history. And I'd like to read something to you and let that kind of sit with our audience. And it was written by the person who actually created boarding schools. It's a little gross, but I think it really lays context to where our federal government, the United States government, and their thought process really was in regards to Native Americans historically. And it says, a great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indians there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. From General Richard Pratt. And he created boarding schools, and that was the thought process. You know, when we hear about, our African-American relatives in shackles, do they realize that they also created those for Indian children? They forcibly removed those children by the tens of thousands between 1869 and 1961-ish, throughout a little bit more than 1960s. But for over 100 years, it was federal law to forcibly remove Indigenous children from their home in the tens of thousands into these boarding schools where they were beaten, they were assaulted, they were sexually assaulted, they were killed. There were children that were molested by, pastors and preachers and workers, that opened these schools in the name of God, heaven forbid, and they used God as the excuse to create massacres on children, to harm children in ways, to bury children in mass graves, to burn children alive so that they didn't have to survive. And I think that's where we are. I think that until the United States government says, look, we created laws that were inherently, the more natives you kill, the more we'll pay you. The more you kill off their food source, which was bison and buffalo back then, the more we'll pay you. The more we do to these people to create these genocidal effects, we will pay you. The United States government has done that. The United States government walked into a country and took a loving culture, and people like to call us savages. We weren't that. Did we fight on occasion? Sure, but they do that worldwide. Let's be very real. So let's not pretend that we're new to this. But where we are is they took a family-based culture. Native people are family-based. We're tribally based for a reason. We're star people. We come from the stars, all right? That's part of our creation story for a lot of us. And for us, you took away our families. You took away our future. Those boarding schools were the gateway to our future. And then ICWA was created because they were taking children. I don't think the United States really understood. They were taking children up into the 70s. 1970s. They were still removing them from the homes. I was born in the 70s. They weren't taking me. I'm from Chicago, but if I was born on a reservation, I guarantee you there might have been a fight here and there. They were at the place where they were still taking children in the 1970s. Well, they were talking about hippies in Woodstock. They were taking children from their homes.
Well, wait. I mean, Mark,
really think about what that looks like.
Well, hold on, because Mark Fancher, you, as you embrace our Africanness and our Black history, you always put that forward, and I think that's a great thing. You have always said, wait a minute, we must first look at the indigenous people. We have to do that. When you hear Melody Serna give us what has happened, when you hear her read that passage, when you hear the program that was put forth for indigenous people, what do you think?
Well, it's a reminder of just how brutal the treatment has been of indigenous peoples in this country. And, the thing that is worst about the United States and makes us feel the worst about it is also one thing that also may give us some degree of hope for it. And that is that there remains some semblance of conscience that causes an intense degree of guilt that this country has felt because they know what they did. I mean, it's not just the things that were described, but also the massacres. I mean, there were so many of them, and they were usually conducted against people who were defenseless. The Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado was conducted against a peaceful community of elders, women, and children. And before it was all over, the cavalrymen who went into that village and slaughtered everybody walked away with trophies that included the genitalia of the people that were killed that they proudly displayed on their uniforms and on their hats. I mean, that's the degree to which they were brutal. And the country knows that. And the way that particularly the white community has dealt with this has been through a process of self-delusion and the creation of lies and myths about who indigenous peoples are and what they have been, so that in the popular culture you always see in the movies that they're always characterized as these bloodthirsty, savage people who have no conscience and who go throughout the West terrorizing innocent white settlers. That's the image that makes them feel a little bit more comfortable about all the history of brutality that is part of what this country is all about. And likewise, they've created myths about African people as well. And that myth very often is on the extreme ends of the spectrum. On one end, African people are characterized as being lazy, as indolent, as people who are looking for a handout, people who've never contributed anything. And then on the other end of the spectrum, they are extremely violent. They're extremely bloodthirsty. They're brutal, and they're savage, with nothing in between. And these are all images that are created to help people feel a little bit better about this history of brutality that we've seen and that we've witnessed. So it's that little sliver of conscience, which I think accounts to some degree for this recent Supreme Court decision, because they know what was done to these families. They know how they've been separated, how the culture has been deliberately and strategically purged from the children who've been taken into the boarding schools and into other families. And so this ruling does affirm the provisions of the Indian Child Welfare Act, which allows for for a priority, for a hierarchy of priorities in terms of where children are placed. First priority is given to extended family of the child, if that's not available to members of their tribe. And lastly, to an Indian community that may not necessarily be a member of the tribe. It is the least that this country could do to try and preserve the integrity of indigenous families.
Reverend Wilson, why should this resonate with Black people? I mean, and I mean with all Americans, but starting with Black folks and other people who've lived under the boot of oppression.
I think the interesting thing about indigenous American people is that they were never considered property. They were always viewed and treated as a nation that had been conquered, a conquered nation. African Americans were brought here. We did not seek to be here. And we were brought from different countries and different tribes that were located on the continent of Africa. And so all of us, we've had to spend years and still spending money and time trying to find and trace our roots. The indigenous people have known they were here first. And so they have struggled continuously to fight to remain identified as who they are, not to assimilate into the American culture, not to be like the white Americans, the European Americans. That was never their desire. They continuously tried to, this is our land. This is our country, and therefore we have a culture, we have a history that we want generations yet unborn to remember and to understand. They were not trying to, I think African Americans spent a significant amount of time trying to be free. And now we have moved from freedom to this movement to be treated as equal people, as an equal nation, really. But it's hard for us because many of us do not seek to know and do not seek to see ourselves as separate and unequal. And so I think that Thurgood Marshall and many of the legal scholars who did Brown versus the Board of Education, they understood legally we were never treated as separate and equal. We were always treated as property, even in the eyes of the law. They're doing us a favor, allowing us to go to their schools. That was not our desire. Our desire was to have equal resources in the schools that we had. That's how we lost a sense of our history. You remember years ago, I grew up with grandparents that told me stories. Many of them could not read or write, but they told me about my family. They told me about my heritage. They told me why we eat certain things. The way we eat food, the way we cook food, that's not American, it's African in a real sense. And so I think that we have been
I got about 30 seconds.
treated. We've just been treated in a very different way. We've never been treated as a nation, and we don't behave as if we're a nation of people within this country. We just struggle. Half of us are struggling to be like them, and the other half we fighting to know who we are. And then, well, I shouldn't say half, third and third. And then another third said, "Look, I know who I am. I'm just trying to tell you. I'm going to teach my children who they are and whose they are." And we've had a strong spiritual history that many have decided to let go of.
Well, maybe we can learn something from Indigenous people.
Conversation.
Well, I am too, and maybe what we can do is learn from them. You make a brilliant point about being a nation. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes.
Can change the world.
Okay, we're still on StreamYard, everybody. You can talk to everybody here. Dwight, what have you been? Oh, I'm sorry, Reverend Wilson. Yes.
I was just going to ask Melody to talk about this nationhood because we've never really examined, Santita, African Americans, our nationhood in the same way that Native Americans have.
Well, wait a minute, Dwight. Why is nationhood important to your way of thinking? Remember, Reverend used to say, "What time is it? It's nation time." When we come together, it's nation time. Why is that? It takes me to that.
Which came out of Baraka's poem. Baraka's poem.
Imamu Baraka. Right.
Is that we one thing is we've never been a nation here. Is the natives are a legitimate nation. I mean that their land was stolen. We've never had license declare a particular land here. Our land, even the notion that white people are declared settlers rather than invaders presumes that they've had the right to take an existing people's land. Secondly, there's a presumption that Africans, because we were taken from different tribes, very strategically, made it very hard for us to bond as communities. It took us hundreds of years to really redefine ourselves because they would put a Yoruba and a Ashanti and another tribal group on the same plantation. And so even the slaves early in couldn't speak
2 minutes
language to each other. They had to adopt English as even the language to communicate with each other because all of them came out of different cultures and different tribes. And so nationhood, the notion of nationhood has been very hard for us to accept and for the broader culture to accept it. Now, Elijah Muhammad's philosophy was give us 5 states and let us establish ourselves as a nation within a nation. So that has created such resistance because white people don't want to give anything up. Lastly, even the notion of equality presumes that they are the standard and everybody else needs to be like them. So we have to really rethink our whole ethos, our whole approach to what this thing is about, because we have been so decimated and treated, as Jeanette said, like animals and property. And so before
1 minute.
you can establish nationhood, you have to develop your personhood
first.
And we have to really work on our definitions of ourselves and understand who we really are in God's kingdom first. And then we can talk more about, nationhood. And in a real sense, we need to adopt Africa, our native continents. We need to kind of go back to, as far as we can, our roots and use them as our point of reference for our self-definition. Because as long as you define yourself, first as an American, as I talked about before, American makes certain suppositions, and one of them is, ethnocentrism. And so when you define yourself as an American first, you really give up
Stand by.
cultural ethnicity.
Okay,
and
stand by. When you all hear my voice, I gotta go. Stop. I'm coming up.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Yes, we can. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Wow, Melody, you have started something here today on the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Colleen, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, but I have a question for the panel from Colleen, who called in. She said, can Indigenous people from Canada vote in America? I don't know if you mean the United States, or do you, how does voter registration work for the nations, Melody?
So Canada,
since you're not being counted on your land. It's just,
well, they are being counted, actually. So the great thing about our First Nations relatives, so we don't recognize these colonized political borders between the United States and Canada. We call it the medicine line. So we've had, I come from the Anishinaabe Nation, so that is stretched from Canada throughout the United States and through kind of that history. But we have this beautiful thing called the J border, the J Treaty. It's a border alliance between Canada and the United States that actually has and gives our First Nations relatives dual citizenship. They have the right to work and go to school and counted as domestic folks. They don't necessarily, they can vote in our elections when they're on the side. They get Social Security cards. They can register to vote. They get driver's license. So they have dual citizenship rights. And what's really great, and I'll go back to this just super quick, because again, this is, this can be very long-winded, but Canada got it right in a lot of ways. They have a long way to go, but Canada got it right when Canada decided that it wanted to say, we did it wrong. We did the things that were atrocious. We still sit in the country, and I was listening on the break. Here's my 2 cents. And again, this is my opinion. But when we are sitting here talking about the Supreme Court, we have to remember that we didn't, who is this court supreme to? It is built off of 2 documents, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. And those 2 documents collectively have said that our African-American relatives were 3/5 of a person, and it said that Native Americans were savages. The government was never going to tell either one of our groups of people that this country was built on stolen land and on the backs of unpaid labor. Let's be very clear about how we got here, because it was not white settlers that built any God blessed thing, right? It was built on our backs and on our lands from our people, both, natives and our African-American relatives. And when we look at our Canadian relatives, at least their government has said we did wrong. And you are considered a person now. They have a long way to go in regards to other things, right? But Canada has one of the largest amounts of mass graves for Native children. When we're talking about, the boarding schools, right? You talk about the destruction of family. How can you create family when a government doesn't even consider you human? You can't protect the circle of fatherhood and familyhood and future generations when a United States government does not even talk about how human we are, when we aren't considered that way. So when we're talking about why doesn't this person have nations or these people have nations, I think the land is always going to be an issue, but it's not because people are less than. I think the settler colonialism version of what they believe who has rights, and those rights are still above Native rights. They shouldn't be, but they are, right? That's the Constitution in which they written was actually, the basis was written by the Haudenosaunee people. The Iroquois Confederacy is what the white people called it back then. They didn't write it. They took it from Natives. So their own Constitution, their own bylaws, the first 10 amendments, they were written by Native people. They weren't written by white people. They were just translated differently for themselves. And so how do we get to a place where we can protect our family if we're not protecting the very basis, if we're not changing and amending the very basis of what this country is put on? We want to protect our families. We go back to the beginning. We go back to amending those constitutions because it can be done. It was getting done, right? We got the right to vote. But in those times when they were taking our children, our Native people per capita were fighting in wars to protect their land and protect their families. They were taking 70% of our men to go fight in a war when they weren't even considered citizens yet. They weren't even citizens yet. Until 1924, they fought an entire world war, and they lost themselves, and they lost language, and they lost their children. You know how many of those men went to war and came back, and their children were gone? Those families never got their kids back. So when we talk about the relationship with men in our family, but we talk about just families and family units as a whole, the United States government has a lot to do with the reason why our families are in peril. They've been in trouble for generations. They've been in trouble for hundreds of years. And it goes, the cases of, Brown versus the Board of Education, Brecken and Holland, all of these big, huge, monumental cases about protecting our children came from the basis that they never considered us human beings. And until we get the United States government to fix those phrases in our documents, how are they ever going to look at us that way? Because we'll keep sitting in a white Supreme Court until someone changes it. And that's how you change the view. That's how you change a country.
Well, which is why I'm pivoting to, and not pivoting, because to me, this is one contiguous conversation. When I cannot tell you how many people, Melody and Dwight McKee, Reverend Dr. Yeary, and Reverend Jeanette Wilson, and Attorney Mark Fancher, how many people are shocked when I say, the CDC did come out with a study that showed that Black fathers were the most involved fathers in the United States. It's profoundly offensive to me as the daughter of a daddy. And I've been a daddy's girl, and I've had a father as a woman. And I've had an Uncle Saint, Claire Booker. I can just name the men in my life who have, Uncle Saint never had a child. But I'd let him know, yeah, you had plenty of children. Your wife just didn't have them. You loved and protected all of us. And for Black men to be painted this way, and by extension, Melody, for Indigenous men to be painted this way, to be disempowered in this way, but for Black men to be painted constantly as absent fathers, as if we created the baby daddy. Reverend Dr. Yeary, we didn't create that. White folks created that. The slave master did that. What is the impact of this myth, the myth of the absent Black father? How does that impact our community and the broader American community, Reverend Dr. Yeary?
Well, it was intended to frame for lack of a better term, a cultural narrative that would inform not just how policy was done, but how folks behaved when it came to Black men as fathers. Their fatherhood was tied to hypersexuality, to deviant behavior, to violent tendencies, and then to ultimate irresponsibility, that they were just reckless in their manhood. I think it's important that we draw the connection to that framing to what happens the day after Father's Day this year. It's the Juneteenth national holiday. That in that system of lack of personhood, person is a legal standard, it's a legal definition in U.S. framing, in the law, that the inhumane treatment that was imposed on Black bodies was justified by white law. And when you say you were 3/5 of a person, that didn't mean you were partly person. It was, there was a counting of you as if you were a person, you would have this value to the political enterprise. That's what 3/5 of a person actually meant. And so when we consider this treatment, Andrew Billingsley, when he did the sociological study, when we look at these numbers that the CDC has published, that has been, that's data that is in spite of the horrific ends to which there was intentional displacement of Black men from the home, particularly when it came to getting governmental resources. How Andrew Billingsley had students, researchers sitting in the parking lots of public housing apartments, watching the tide, that the government would have their monitors sitting in the parking lot to see if the fathers would come into the household and therefore disqualify the mothers from getting public assistance. And so there was an interesting thing that he noted, that there was such an important intentionality to Black fathers being present, that they would wait until the monitors would leave late in the night just to spend a couple of hours in the household with their families and leave before the monitors came back in the morning. And so we have to recognize that these numbers are not just impressive when it looks to the comparative. It dispels the myth. But we got to frame it. How do you get to those numbers anyway? That is against great resistance, both in terms of policy and practice, to be able to continue to be present with families when your very identity and the operationalizing of family was imposed, was the target of an imposed dysfunction, not an authentic dysfunction. And so when we look at these numbers and we look at this data, it's news to everybody except Black folks who have had to find their way to do as we do in jazz. We had to improvise in how we operated as family outside the specter and the view of the system that was trying to destroy the Black family in the same voice. And so this is a moment that the data, while it is to be acknowledged as an important confirmation, it's confirmation to Black folk. It ain't information. We knew that this is how we had to operate, and we continue to operate in spite of systems that seek to totally decimate the presence of Black men, the prison industrial complex, the displacement of Black men out of the family, even to this day. These are the structural issues that we continue to have to overcome just to be able to fulfill our rightful place in the network and in the system of being family in America.
And Mark Fanter, indeed, some of this, but it filters down and it filters in. I mean, I have a friend who had a child with the woman who was his girlfriend. They're no longer together, and we hadn't seen each other in some time. And he said, I'm a good father now. I'm with my child. I'm like, I would expect you to be, because I knew you. I mean, well, you know what they say. I'm like, I don't say that. So, I mean, talk to me about this, the impact that this myth has on the culture.
It has a huge impact, and the most tragic impact is on the minds of young Black males themselves.
Yes.
This is all a reminder of the war that has been waged against African people generally, but specifically against African men. And, we can understand why they would. If you just think for a minute about real Black men, okay, starting from the beginning with Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, you work your way up into Medgar Evers, you talk about Kwame Ture, you talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Reverend Jesse Jackson, you talk about, you just keep going. All of these are men who were very dignified people, very committed people, people who really were the epitome of what you would hope men would be about in terms of their commitment and their determination to make their people free. And it is this determination, this commitment to free people, which terrified the white structure, which terrified those who tried to maintain this state of oppression. And in order to deal with it, they resorted to the most brutal means. Lynching was something that was a routine thing for decades, both during and after the slave era. And it was intended to control these people, and it was so unconscionable, so horrific, that they had to rationalize and justify it in their own minds just to calm their own consciences. And so this myth was created about this brute, this savage black man, this man whose commitment is not to his people, but to raping white women. His commitment is to killing people. His commitment is to being a thug. And so this is the image that made here to kill black men. And it was a necessary image. It was something that they had to have and which they have served. And it got to the point where, you get up to the era where the Black Panther Party is walking tall and proud through the streets of the black community carrying rifles. When you see that in the wake of continuing instances of police terrorism against black communities, you see black people going into the streets. When you see people in the civil rights movement who are standing tall and straight-backed against armed police and against police dogs and against the power of the state, and they're armed with nothing more than their Bibles, these are images which are terrifying to the structure, to the power structure, and they have to counteract that. They have to deal with it. And when they can't deal with it exclusively through psychological operations, in terms of imagery, in terms of propaganda, in terms of lies and myths, then they have to resort to physical means. There is a book called Whiteout, which was written by Alexander Coburn and Jeffrey St. Clair, where they talk about, in the wake of the uprisings of the 1960s and the 1970s, the Central Intelligence Agency employed a man named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb to conduct some really awful and incredible experiments in terms that were focused on how to control black men. And one of the things that he came up with was the idea of chemical castration. They talk about how he proposed that in the same way that the ox, when he's castrated, just does his job and doesn't question, doesn't rebel, that's what would happen to black men if they would chemically castrate them. They didn't go through with that, but what they did go through with was something that was also proposed, and that was to control the community through the spread and the use of narcotics. And so that not only made it possible to disorient lots of black men, but it also gave a justification and a rationale for rounding up large numbers of them and forcefully removing them from the presence of their families. So it's not totally a myth that black men are absent from their families. They, in fact, are. But it's not because they chose to be absent from them. It's because the state removed huge numbers of them and put them in prisons, and then turned around and blamed them for being absent and being irresponsible. The whole thing should cause anybody who has any doubts about whether there's a war against African people to reach only one conclusion, and that is that they're out to get us.
Dwight McKee, I have a couple minutes for you. What say you about this absent black father? It's a myth. We grew up in the same church and with the same people. We were surrounded by fathers.
Well, that's why I used to talk about that. You drain all of the air out the room, and then you blame people for suffocating. That's what white people did. That's what Mark is talking about. Is that they set the system up whose chief priority is to take black men out of play, because they know that the family is the basis of power in community and progress. And so if you can disinvest the black man from the family, then you're not left with a whole family. And then you glorify, and in many ways justifiably, a single mother for raising these kids and make that the new standard, and that's who you exalt, and then blame the black man for not being there, and then pit them against each other, which further confuses the children, then you have what they desire to have is organized chaos. Because the chaos is more manageable and more controllable. And so these are white people who want to maintain their power systematically and strategically declare war on black men because that's their way of maintaining control. I think our challenge is not to buy the myth, to understand that we've been victims rather than delinquents in relationship to our families. Absolutely. And to understand that this has been a plan from the outside in, and to really try to create strategies of resistance to say, to declare for ourselves that no, we're not going to be manipulated by media to believe that we've been delinquent, and we're going to resist at every level those institutions would seek to lock us up. So whenever they pass a law that's set up for us to be victims of, we have to not succumb. We know that drugs were set up to set us up that way. We have to resist that. We know that education, these bad schools, this non-educational environment that we're raised in, that teaches us that ignorance is the greatest, is synonymous with black. Mm-hmm. We have to understand that and resist that. We have to look at what their strategy is and create a counter strategy just to maintain balance and equality in this.
Well, and I just have a few more minutes left here, and I want to give a couple to you, literally a couple, Reverend Wilson. I mean, because we have taken on this myth in the black community. Not just outside of our community, but many black women have bought into this. And I've had to stop a lot of women and say, hey, no, it's not true. It's just not true. And we're not honoring these fathers, and we're not helping. I think it's so unhelpful to I told someone, one of the most educated people I know, one of the most brilliant people I know, I told her about this study, and she pushed back on me. I said, "You do numbers for a living. Are you for real? Here's the data." Reverend Wilson, 2 minutes.
Well, I think that we're consumed with media images, negative media images of fatherhood, black manhood, and many women have bought into the myth. They look at these movies, and I grew up in an era of several television shows where black men were depicted as buffoons and not hardworking at all. They didn't have jobs, didn't want to work, just lay around. And, so you're bombarded with those images. And if, as in many cases, the men were not in the home, they were confused as to what really a black father looked like. My father works 3 jobs most of my life, and yet Sunday was family time. I mean, he was able to cook and spend time with us. This man made us read the encyclopedia. I thought he was crazy. So, they would quiz you on stuff. I'm like, what is wrong with him? And, he was a stand-up guy. When he went shopping, he never believed. He said, we went to Community Discount Center. You remember this store? And they had long lines. And he said, oh, no, we're not standing in line. Open up another line, because if I got to spend my money is just as white as their money. And, he would just act crazy in stores, but he had a certain level of dignity. But he came from the South, and his father My grandparents owned a little small family farm, so we grew up understanding the role of black men in the family. They were the heads of the family.
I have 1 minute before we go. What did your father's dignity do for you? And everyone, I want you to stay with me on the Santita Jackson Show. We're going to get some closing thoughts from everybody, Melody, everybody on the other side. But last 30 seconds, what did they do for you?
Well, when my father would stand up and speak out, just certain things, he said, you have to expect people to treat you as a human. I'm not property. I'm not just any dog. I remember my mother had ordered some carpeting, and the guy was rolling it out on the grass, and my daddy said, take it back. You don't do that to white people. So he had a sense of his own manhood, a sense of self-worth. And he went to the army like Reverend's father and came back. He blew up bridges in the military, came back. He could not get in construction. So I'm saying black men have had dignity. Some of them allowed it to be diminished. And there were some men that didn't, but it was a struggle for them. Every single day they struggled. And so I salute.
I salute.
We have to honor that. We have to recognize that.
I salute them. I salute them, which is why I fight so hard against this mess every single day. Melody, we have to fight against it.
And I think women need to stop treating, stop acting like black men don't care about their children.
You hear the music, I gotta go.
All right,
don't
I
do
hear
that.
The music.
Everybody, stop doing that. Don't do that. This is Jesse Lewis Jackson's daughter signing off. That's right, my daddy, who on my worst day made me feel like I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I love you, Daddy. I say that for all of us with these daddies. Love you, everybody. God bless you, and happy Father's Day. Okay, everybody, I want to get some closing thoughts from everybody. Melody, I know you heard a whole lot, and you know what, Fania and Laura, they all want you to have shows on this station. I wanted to say that on the air, and I'm going to speak to some people. Well, that's not funny. It's true. I mean, because hearing your perspective and hearing your strength is very empowering to all of us. Well,
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I want you to be part of our conversations, because you are part of the conversation, and you have to know that you belong here, right here.
We got to get her at push.
Yeah.
This is so important.
Well, we need to have this conversation, and I think that we need to know Dwight and Mark and Reverend Dr. Yeary. Reading that passage was so oh my God. I mean, for us to understand, yes, to understand the indigenous experience, we need to hear that. We need to talk about it. So, Melody, why don't you respond to what you've heard?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and I think it is, right, and it's real heavy, because I think we get to these places. We've said it a little bit, throughout the morning, where there's this public perception of what bad fathers are, and how that looks in Black and brown communities, and why is that? And what's really chilling, I looked at those numbers, right, that you sent me, Santita, right? I read it, and I looked at it. And I said, do you know, if you really start to look, and I'm all about data, I'm a qualitative, quantitative data kind of person. You know what numbers are missing? It's always indigenous numbers.
Absolutely.
They miss them every time. And so there is no voice on what an indigenous father could look like, or what an indigenous family looks like. And for me, that's the conversation that sometimes I try to, again, I don't play oppression Olympics, over, one race or another. I tell people across the board in our communities, if we're not uplifting each other, then we're holding everyone back. That's where we are. So, yes, it's our land. Yes, our relatives, came here and built this country on unpaid labor, Santita, unpaid labor. They didn't ask to be here, and they built the country on unpaid labor. And we are all fighting for the same equality for ourselves, for our children, and for our future, and what that really looks like, and sustainability in regards to just this country and the fabric of the country and how we got here. And I think it's so huge, when we break down data, but beyond the data, just look at human beings. Look at how we live every day. I can tell you that data will only ever tell you what you ask it. It'll only ever tell you what you ask it. So if you're asking that in an urban space, are you asking that in a rural space? Are you asking that in rich white America? Are you asking those questions? Where are you asking those questions? You know, who did you ask those questions to? Was it one city? Was it several cities? You know, is it across the nation, one area versus another? Like, data will only tell you what you ask it. So sometimes I tell our people, don't just look at the data, look at your people, look at your community. Because if that data is not representative of your community, then it's useless. It's absolutely useless. Because if you ask me to look at data from a black neighborhood in Atlanta, and then you ask me to go look at one from a black neighborhood, you know, or a black population in Beverly Hills, honey, they're not going to say the same thing. What they need are not the same. If you ask me what you need on the Navajo Nation versus what you need, you know, on the Cherokee Nation, not the same thing. You can't keep putting us all in these big pots and saying for our people that, you know, this is what we need for black folks. This is what we need for Latino folks. This is what we need for Native and Indigenous folks. We're not the same people. We don't live in the same place. So the same numbers are not truly indicative of what we need. That's another white person's perspective. It's a colonized perspective on how they get to treat us by the numbers.
Well, I tell you what, Laura is loving this conversation. A lot of people are, I guess, because we also don't hear, Indigenous people in these conversations enough or at all.
I hear them we rarely hear them. And I think the interesting thing is African Americans are still viewed as if we are still slaves with a certain amount of freedom. But when you look at the largest continent, Africa, we talk very little about our real history and the countries on the continent. And so when you've raped our land as raped North America, you raped the continent of Africa for all of the resources and all of the tools and talent. I mean, I used to tell people, I'm from Egypt, Africa. And so you keep drawing a map so that you diminish, you got people confused as to where the Middle East is and all kinds of things. That's why we have to know our history and understand who we are and whose we are. And I'm just so excited about this indigenous conversation because there's so many parallels and similarities. We are a nation of people who came from the continent of Africa. We were snatched from there. We're not some people that just grew up hating each other and we are shiftless and lazy. That's ridiculous.
Mark Fancher, what are your thoughts as we begin to wind things down here?
Well, I think that this entire conversation has been entirely appropriate and essential, if for no reason other than that in the so-called experiment that is called the United States of America, there are only two groups that did not voluntarily participate in it. Those were enslaved Africans who were kidnapped and the indigenous nations. They didn't come to this voluntarily. And it's because they didn't come to it voluntarily that both groups have always been a special problem for the United States. They've never known quite what to do with our groups. They've never known quite what to do in terms of management of us. And they've alternated between brutality and unconscionable acts in order to keep us in line. And so I think we have always sort of known that intuitively, which is why even during the slave era, those who were escapees from the plantations, enslaved Africans who got away, frequently found refuge and comfort and protection from the indigenous communities who recognized their plight, who made common cause with them, and many of them became parts of indigenous nations because of that. And even those so-called 5 civilized tribes that participated in the slave enterprise didn't do it correctly according to the U.S. government, and they were punished for it. I mean, they actually treated enslaved people as though they were family. They actually treated them with dignity, which is not how it's supposed to be done. That frustrated the whole purpose in trying to enlist them in that entire enterprise so that they would stop giving refuge to these people when they ran away from white plantation owners. So we see we have a shared responsibility to each other and to our respective communities. And I also think that given that it is coming up on Father's Day weekend, that we all need to reflect on the fact that we're all children of the Supreme Father, who has certain expectations for all of us, who has all of our best interests at heart, and who has promised us, as any good daddy would, that we're going to get what we most desire, and that is dignity and freedom and justice. And we just need to do our job. We need to know what our Father in heaven expects from us, and to stay true to who we are, stay true to our principles, and to continue to be diligent in our fight. And only good things can come from that. Only good things will come from that. It's been promised.
Amen to that. Reverend Dr. Yeary?
Yes, ma'am.
Your closing thought?
There are many of them. The question about what does this moment mean, this Father's Day, this second year of the commemoration of the Juneteenth national holiday, and hearing the Supreme Court rulings and how it affects Native peoples, there's much more work to be done. To Dwight's earlier point and the comments about the Supreme Court, they're exactly right. But one of the things I've learned from Reverend is you learn to navigate the rules as they are, not as you wish them to be, so that you can change the rules to what they must be if we're going to have progress. So a lot of this is making sure that we acknowledge in this ongoing need for resistance, not just struggle, resistance, that our drive, our inner fire that makes resistance what resistance must be, must happen on all fronts, not just on the ones that seem to be most likely for success. So to the points about making sure the data is right, making sure the court rulings are accurate, making sure the teachings are right, making sure that what the system doesn't teach, we teach ourselves, because there was a time when we didn't have access to the system anyway, and we still learned. That we don't impose on ourselves an artificial or superficial dependence on anything that does not allow us to thrive at the fullness of our being. And so as we come to this Father's Day and we look at data, that doesn't validate. It informs how we see. The validation of Black fathers has always been inherent in Black people. We celebrate ourselves, not we give ourselves permission to celebrate ourselves when some data comes out that says, "Oh, look, y'all not that bad." We already knew that. This wasn't something that somehow gives us a new perspective about who we are. And so it's that view, it's that fire, it's that drive, it's that motivation that causes us to plant the seeds that will lead to a harvest that we may never see, because we have to invest in the structural change we want so that generations yet unborn inherit a world that is much different than the one we find ourselves in right now.
Reverend Wilson, are you still there? She might have had to.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm here.
I need you to come in a little closer so we won't get any background noise. I wanted to get a closing thought from you.
Well, I think that it is important for us to see all of the things that have happened on this continent, in this country, that have impacted indigenous people and then have impacted those people who were brought here as property. There are similarities and there are vast differences. We must know our history and our heritage, that we might be able to unite together to make all of us better and to reach common ground in a nation that has been populated by people who seized the land, conquered the people, so to speak, and tried to erase a history of a people that built strong foundations within family, within country. And then as we teach our history to our generations yet to come, we have to be able to answer the question, what meaneth these things? What meaneth these stones, these ropes, these monuments, so that every child will know that they are part of God's kingdom and they have a lot to live for, a lot to learn, and a lot to do. And as Mark Fincher has said, all of us can celebrate Father's Day because all of us have a Heavenly Father that has taken us through some difficult days and will be with us through it all. And that's the model of fatherhood, unconditional love for the family, for the children, and for the people that we are not even aware of how our connections overlap. So I thank God for this indigenous conversation. And even as we look at the Supreme Court, I will look at it differently now as I read the opinions and I think about who's on the court and who designed the court in the first place. It's not supreme in the sense for all of us.
No, it's not supreme.
I thank you, Santita.
No, I thank you. I thank
There
you
you go.
because you all made the conversation. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, and thank goodness we're living in a time, Melody, in which we see just how not supreme the court is. You know, we say, oh, okay, there's a lot of mess here. And this what we're seeing in this moment. What's your closing thought, Melody?
Yeah.
You know, I think, again, you know, I'm always thankful for the space. I'm thankful for the conversation. I'm thankful for, you know, the voice to be able to speak. And I don't want to always say on behalf of Indigenous people, but with Indigenous people. As an Indigenous woman, I think, you know, my opinion is mine, but, you know, I would like to believe that my opinion is based in fact. It's based on historical facts. It's based on life experience of being an Indigenous woman. And, you know, just always thankful for the space to come and be able to share that and to educate where we can and to really just be in fellowship with my Black and brown relatives. And so, you know, in my language, we say Chumigwich. In my other tribal language, we say Yauko. And, you know, and that's how we do it. And I'm always, you know, blessed to be, you know, in this space with all you beautiful people and all these beautiful opinions. So thank you.
No, well, you don't have to thank me. Does family need to thank each other? Sometimes it's nice, but, you know, we're family. And, you know, Dwight McKee, your closing thought.
Well, I would first, out of respect, take the case to the Navajo Supreme Court and let them rule, and then let the U.S. Supreme Court react to them. I think part of the resistance is resist the narrative. At the same time, they were degrading our men on television. They were exalting white single fathers. So the rifleman, Chuck Connors, was a white single father, but he was who shot people and killed people. But he was a great guy. Fred McMurray had 3 sons. Nobody really knew was he ever married or where they came from, but he was exalted. Even Mr. Drummond had 3 children without a wife, 2 of whom it looked like he picked up from the basketball court. I mean, you have
oh, man.
You never knew if they even had a family. And so we have to really be conscious and know what we're looking at and resist the narrative. I always say that the Romans created the Parthenon. We give them that. The Greeks created the Pantheon. We give them that. But the Martians created the pyramids. You know, Africans could not have done that. And so it really is a matter of us understanding how we're being brainwashed over time in the subtle ways and learning to resist that narrative and establish our own.
Everybody, I hope that you've gotten something good from this conversation. Hey, Abraham, my sweet, down there in Venezuela, sending you so much love. Sending all of you so much love today. I hope that you have a blessed Father's Day, and I hope that you will honor the fathers in your lives, whether it's the father of your blood or the father of your spirit or both. I think it's important that we do that. This is almost a forgotten holiday, and it ought not be. Our fathers mean so much to us. Without them, we would not be here. So honor your father, honor him, and do yourself a favor. If you are estranged from your father, please, for yourself, make things right. Make things right. For you, for you, for you. It's not you. Forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself, not to someone else. It helps to clean you up inside. So do that. And I just want to, in a special way, thank my father for being the daddy he's always been to me, for being the for being the father that he became to me as I became an adult. I just thank him for always, always being there. I remember Melody walking through a crowd, and it was a couple of thousand people. We were outside of a ballroom at one of our events. And I'd been speaking to my father, and a lot of people were trying to talk to him, but it was fine. I just had something quick to give to him. And my mother trained us not to be needy for our father, because she said, your father fulfills your needs. He's home. But he has another mission. Okay. So I'd forgotten to tell him something that he needed to know. And he was some distance from me, and I shouted, Daddy. And out of all of those hundreds of people who were in the hallway, maybe it was more than 1,000 people, he turned around. And my friend Marcus, who was with him, said, oh my goodness. He called me later and he said, you know what? With all of those people around, when your father heard your voice, he stopped and he said, my baby's calling me. Where is she? I'll never forget that. That he heard me. And that's been my life story with him. My father's always heard me. He's always seen me. And I'm so grateful to God for that. So much of my nerve and it comes from both parents, quite frankly. But you need a female embodiment and expression of your humanity, and you also need the masculine, the male expression of your humanity as well, because we are so many things. And so I thank my father for always, always, always being there for me and being here for me. And God bless him. And that's right, Janet. I feel that way. I love my father with all of my heart. And I thank God for him. I was my parents' surprise baby in college. And my parents fought for me to get here. And I thank God for both of them individually. And more than that, I thank them for being together for these more than 60 years. I love you, everybody. I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Father's Day. Hope that you will feel blessed. And I hope that you will feel whatever the earthly entanglements have been and misunderstandings. I hope that you know that somewhere deep down inside, your father does love you. He does, he does, he does.
Well, happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day, Yuri and Mark. God bless you all.
Happy Father's Day. And to Melody, happy Father's Day, because we all have daddies. So
happy Father's Day to all of you beautiful men on the show. Thank you. And to the Reverend himself. So send that for me if you would.
Of course I will. And I just say happy Father's Day to you, Dwight, to you, Mark, to you, Reverend Yuri, to Reverend Jeanette Wilson, and to you, Melody, and to Henry, who's over there running everything at the station, sending everybody so much love today. May God bless you. God bless you. Hey, Effie, how you doing? Thank you so much. And I hope that you got something good out the show today. A lot of people loved hearing you, Melody. So you keep on talking. I cannot wait to have you back on the Santita Jackson Show. You have a new home. It's early, but it's yours. I love you, everybody. What you say? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll do it. God bless you. Love you, everybody.
I got you.